Welcome to or welcome back to Endurance Icons, where we sit down with individuals crushing it in the world of endurance sport. We are super pumped to have on the show today professional triathlete Cody Beals, who's been crushing it on the long distance circuit for many years now with lots of titles to his name. So we're really excited to hop into the conversation today with Cody about a number of topics around triathlon, as he says on his website, radically transparent. So we're excited to hear all the ins and outs of triathlon. So welcome, Cody. How's it going?
Thanks so much, Mark and Jess. I'm doing really well. And I was just saying, I love the guests you've lined up so far and honored to be a part of that.
Awesome. Yeah. I think you've been mentioning a couple of the podcasts, maybe some training buddies like Jackson and stuff who've already been on here. So
yeah, I definitely spent a bit of time with Jackson.
Yeah.
And a few of your competitors, you're definitely a force to be reckoned with. So yeah, your name has been dropped before.
Oh, wow.
Well, there's some war stories with Cody Beals on course, no doubt. One question we like to kind of start off the podcast with is maybe just give us a rundown. What did you kind of have on the training schedule today?
So it was a medium-sized day. I had an endurance swim, like a 5.5K swim, nothing too fancy, and then a progression run, kind of a bread and butter for Ironman training block run on the treadmill, just increasing by 0.1 miles an hour every 5 minutes. I also call it the boiling frog sometimes because you just gradually ramp up the pain for like 2 hours. And then I finished off with an easy 90-minute ride on the trainer.
Nice. A good solid day. So yeah, you mentioned this is a bread and butter kind of Ironman run for you, that progression run. Does that mean you have something coming up in the near future here? I don't know if I've seen any race announcements on the Instagram yet.
Yeah, that's the plan. I've deliberately been a little bit coy about the race schedule. I tore my calf about 3 or 4 weeks ago running outside in the snow doing a workout. So I've been easing back into things. I'm cautiously optimistic about racing Ironman Texas, but we're going to see.
Nice, man. The winter training, like we're battling this too after last Sunday, like all those little tweaks here. Like, do you just have these moments where you question why the heck we live up here in like Guelph and Waterloo?
Yeah, for sure. But it also gives you a level of grittiness that maybe the Southern athletes don't have. So there's a long tradition of Canadian endurance athletes who spend the winter here absolutely crushing it. And I also think it imposes some periodization, which isn't a bad thing. It forces you to mix up your routine, your training, maybe train a little bit less over the winter. That's inherently not a terrible thing.
Nice. I like that positive take on it. And I totally agree. Like you saw Brent McMahon last year on that like Ironman Wisconsin day where everybody's crumbling and a good Canadian guy just like, oh, I can take on these conditions. No problem.
Yeah, like a third of the pro field dropped out. And I don't think it was a coincidence that Canadians went 1-2 there. And actually Adam Fye, another Northerner, came third, Northern US. So Northern people well represented.
Yeah, for sure. The grittiness, man, what a great positive take on winter here, where everybody's like, we got to go to Tucson and live in the beautiful, like nice weather all year. It's great to see a positive vibe for the
great
white
done
north
that with
here.
training camps. I don't know, they're not the vibe for me. I do my best work right here at home, sleeping in my own bed, and I've accepted that now 10 years into this career.
Nice, yeah.
Winter helps you win.
It seems like a lot of our athletes really seem to like the at home vibe and have done kind of the jump around. Like Natasha Wodak talked about it when we were here, and she's like been pulled many times to go to places, but once she found her like at home vibe, that's where she was doing her best performances. It seems like you've kind of found the same thing.
Absolutely. And Guelph is a really good place to train. I've got other pro athletes right here in town, Jackson Laundry, Taylor Reed, a few other people always coming in and out of town. So I have everything I need right here.
Sweet. Love it. We'll have to come down and do battle with you guys over there in Guelph. We're just your neighbors. So see what all the Boulder of Canada is looking like over in Guelph there. Cool. So first topic I wanted to jump into here a bit with you is when I started following your journey kind of in my early days of triathlon, it was that you were really transparent about you kind of had opened it up with that yearly budget you were posting each year. Maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about kind of what that yearly budget post is, and maybe why did you decide to post this up for everyone to see when nobody else is really doing this?
Yeah, I guess I get asked a lot about this one. It's kind of become what I'm known for, ironically, because basically I feel like there were a lot of other athletes with around my level of results. And so the question was, how can I differentiate myself from like a sea of similar athletes? And one way that came really naturally to me was just being open and transparent about what I'm doing. And it started out, sharing like blood test results, sharing training logs, And then I think I struck gold with like sharing the budget, and people, I thought like my mom would read this post and my dad maybe and a couple friends, but I should have realized people have a lot of curiosity about money. And so immediately there was a lot of interest in that. So the transparency thing was one reason, setting myself apart also. But also, like when I got into this, there was just no blueprint or roadmap for how to hack it as a pro triathlete. There was no textbook I could check out of the library to figure out how to do this. So I've just kind of been stumbling my way through figuring out how to make this work as a career. And so I was hoping that by opening up my experience with finances every year a little bit, I could maybe help some other pros who are earlier in the career figure out how this works. And I also am just a big believer in transparency benefiting the entire industry. I think anytime there's wage transparency, it's going to benefit professionals. So perhaps I'm just setting a bar, not necessarily a high bar or a low bar, but a reference point that other people can compare to, and, or at least encourage some conversations around like, what is the value of a professional triathlete?
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. That was always such an intriguing read because you didn't really know, like you would see what the prize money was up for races and stuff like that. But beyond that, like you're like, okay, you could do like some short math, but you really had no idea what like the revenue and expenses looked like for a pro. So very
Yeah,
interesting read.
there's only, I'd say, a tenuous relationship between the prize money a professional athlete's earning and what their actual gross revenue is.
Mm-hmm.
There are pros who make almost no additional money besides prize money, and there are pros who make very little prize money and absolutely crush it on the endorsement and sponsorship game. So what you see is not necessarily the bottom line for a lot of athletes.
Has that changed like on the revenue side a bunch for you over a number of years? Like has it gone from mostly prize money and small on the sponsorships to, or the opposite? What's that kind of looked like over the last number of years?
You nailed it. So like my first couple seasons, it was essentially no cash sponsorship, maybe just a little bit of product if I was lucky. And I've gradually built and nurtured those relationships up. And the last, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years, it's been sponsorship heavy. And this season, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I could have a great year of racing, but let's talk about last year. It was at least 2/3 more sponsorship than prize money. So it's definitely tipped more heavily towards that as the years have gone by. And that just reflects the time it takes to build up these sponsor relationships.
Yeah, totally. And on the expense side, I think one of the things I've always found awesome about your channel there is that you always talk about getting the best like bang for your buck as a pro. So like I see you always like you're pretty much your own bike mechanic. You're like making your own nutrition. Talk about some of those things you've done on kind of the expenses side to make sure that you are kind of getting every buck out of that you're kind of taking home.
I mean, we all know it's a really spendy sport. Triathletes love to spend money, and there are a million things you can spend money on. So I'm trying to maximize the utility of every dollar. Obviously, this isn't just a hobby for me, it's my entire career. So I'm really going to great lengths to try and make every dollar count for as much performance as possible. So with that in mind, I've been self-coaching the last couple of years again, which has been going relatively well, I think. I self-represent and manage most of my own sponsor contracts, but I did recently start working with a manager, Steph Corker, who's definitely helped me out. Some companies just won't take you seriously if you waltz in on your own. What else do? I do my own accounting. But you know, so there's all this stuff I do on my own, but I think in the past I tipped too far towards like a lone wolf mentality where I was like, I have to do everything on my own. And if I accept any help, it's going to somehow cheapen my accomplishments. And I don't feel that way at all anymore. So I'm just judicious about the time and energy I take to do things personally versus figuring out what help I can bring in, whatever's going to be more efficient and stretch those dollars even further in terms of making me faster.
One thing that I like about this is it makes you relatable to the amateur athletes because so many of them are looking for similar ways to save money because it is an expensive sport. So watching you do this at, you know, the pro level, it just really reinforces, you know, it builds up that relationship. And you really are present online. I know Mark indicated, I mean, there's even a video where you're actually showing like, here's how I make my nutrition. And I love a good brand building. I'm from communications and PR background. And one of the ways that you show up online, it's clever, it's funny. You have this whole brand online and you seem to be having a lot of fun with it, but I'd love to know how much of this is necessity because you need to brand yourself as a pro and how much of it is that you're just having a blast.
Oh, I appreciate everything you said. And this is such a good question because you struck on something that I really struggle with. Like social media can be absolutely excruciating for me. And there's kind of a duality to it. Like on one hand, who doesn't enjoy attention sometimes? Like some days it's really fun to be, basking in all this attention. And I do think I genuinely enjoy educating, maybe inspiring, at least making people laugh sometimes. But on the flip side, I regularly completely cringe at everything I'm doing and have to take a huge step back and take a break and really get inside my head about it. And part of me would just prefer like a quiet, unobserved life where these moments of my career, sometimes the best and worst moments of your career are playing out in such a public way in triathlon. That can be really gut wrenching. So I really struggle with this. And I've also been pretty sensitive to negativity too. Like I don't really have a thick skin. So, by and large, the comments are overwhelmingly positive, the response I get, but especially getting on TikTok recently, that's ruthless. Like
Oh,
Instagram,
they're
people
savage.
comment. Yeah, it's like they're knocking on your door and telling it to you themselves. But on TikTok, it shows it to such a wide audience. You get people who have no idea what triathlon's about. They just see a privileged dude doing a rich person sport and they're primed to be negative. And so I've just stopped reading comments there altogether because it can be really tough, when you put a lot of effort into something and get a bad response, or at least, a 1% bad response. And so these days I've kind of settled on a formula where, yes, social media is part of the game. I've seen the evolution of the sport over my 10 years in it, where you could just be fast initially and that was enough to get sponsorship. Now you're expected to do a lot more off the race course as well, for better or worse. So these days I just do my best to go about it in an ethical, transparent, self-aware way and not take it too seriously, but I still struggle with it.
Well, and you're a self-professed introvert. So I'd love to know so as a public figure, because you are, how do you manage your energy? And so you've mentioned you don't read comments. What are some other things that you do to sort of recharge that battery and protect that? Because, constantly being this persona, how do you reconcile that with everything else that you do?
So take regular social media breaks, stay the heck out of my DMs. I have responses to my story turned off unless people follow me. And I would love to generate as much engagement as possible and engage with people in every way. And I used to have my email address right in my bio, but at some point it became too overwhelming and I realized I was spending way too much time and energy just responding to people privately, and I just couldn't do that anymore. So I don't have a great answer for you on all that. It's still something that I find challenging every day. One thing that has also been helpful is my partner is a director, screenwriter, content producer, videographer. So I've hired a bit of help from him. And thankfully, with some bigger contracts coming my way now, that's something I can actually justify as a business expense. Mm-hmm. And there's, legitimate measurable ROI on something like that. Because doing it all myself, the training, the racing, the travel planning, on top of content and sponsorship, that is absolutely crushing. That feels like a 100-hour work week sometimes.
That was going to be one of my questions, is if James helps you with the content, because I noticed director. So, I mean, that's pretty fantastic, because even if he's not doing it for you, I'm sure there's a lot of tips and tricks that you can get. And the other question that I had is, how do you come up with the content? Like they really are, I know there is this playfulness to it. Like you scroll through, and to anyone listening, like make sure that you follow Cody Beals. We will put his link of Instagram in the show notes, but genuinely a very funny follow, but you also learn. So the content is very rich. How do you come up with it?
Ideas have never been something we've struggled with. James and I have a huge draft of ideas for content. It's trying to figure out what's going to do well, but also we don't want to chase the algorithm too much. I think that's a trap you can fall into. What's going to feel most like me? What's going to not keep me up at night? Every time I've tried to do something a little bit edgier, sometimes it's generated amazing engagement, but I just don't always feel great about it, So James has been really helpful, and he has this perfect skill set to help me out in a ton of ways. But we're really reticent about mixing business into our relationship too much. Like we have a great thing going. It's best if we don't work together too much. So we try and delineate like very strict boundaries around when we're working. I pay him a fair hourly rate for anything he helps me out with work. And that keeps it pretty sane and compartmentalized within our relationship, or maybe I should say outside of our relationship. So that's something we're working on. He also has way bigger aspirations outside my little rinky-dink social media channels. He's trying to, direct and screenwrite films, and he's already had some short films get into festivals. So I won't be able to afford him for too much longer.
What content have you created lately that you are most proud of?
Oh man, the DIY nutrition video I think was a pretty good one.
That was so good, Cody.
Thanks. Yeah, TikTok's an interesting format. Like you obviously can't capture all the subtleties and nuances in a 30-second to 2-minute video. I used to do deep dive blog posts that were like exhaustive and I think really well researched. But like there's a really limited audience. So the short format video is a big challenge. You reach a way wider audience, but can you convey as much info as possible in a really engaging, concise way, I guess. So that's what I'm trying to do lately. And that one's good because everyone has to deal with nutrition. There's a lot of BS out there about it. So I tried to distill down like the essential science and here's how you can apply it.
And have you gone deep into like the algorithms and stuff? I feel like you come from like a physics background. Do you love jumping into like what these algorithms are and how to optimize or anything? Or are you just like kind of putting it out and hoping? What does that kind of look like for you?
A little bit. Not to an extreme degree though. It's been kind of interesting to see what performs well, and it's not too surprising. It's like educational humor, like sexuality, thirst traps and stuff for everyone, and humor. Those are the three things that do well on social media, at least for my followers. So some of those I feel more comfortable leaning into than others, obviously.
Yeah, we just started working with kind of a social media person to help us out with a bunch of our stuff too. And it's like so interesting to see like how you move things across platforms and like the music that goes across them and stuff and things like that. And it is a wild, confusing world, and definitely helpful to have some expertise in there too.
For sure. A big learning for me lately. I was collaborating with the channel, One Last Lap. It's been really successful in like cycling, bike maintenance and stuff. And he was talking about how critical it is to get like the first few fractions of a second of your videos, your reels, your TikToks dialed in, because people make a snap decision about whether they're going to watch something or not. So as soon as I figured that out, engagement spiked dramatically. It's like the first half a second, people decide, am I interested in this or not?
Yeah, need that hook right away for sure. I wanted to hop in a little bit to kind of the sport as a whole these days. You've been racing as a pro for a number of years here, so I'd love to get your take on kind of some different things that are kind of going around in kind of the sport of triathlon right now. So we kind of talked a little bit about kind of the budget side of things before, but have you felt like there's kind of been a change in the last number of years to kind of help like make it more sustainable for pros? And like what's kind of your take across what the different kind of main companies are doing, if you want to call it, like Challenge, PTO, Ironman? What's kind of your take on all that?
That's a good question. I think it's actually tougher than ever these days. And I've been talking with some other pros, kind of peers of mine around my level who've been in the sport for a number of years, had some success. And we were in agreement. We probably couldn't crack into the sport now as rookies. It would just be too hard. So I think that with respect to the sponsor side of things and even prize money at medium tier races, smaller races, even the larger ones for that matter, it's all stayed pretty flat over the last decade, which is as long as I've been in the sport professionally. It hasn't really kept pace with inflation. So I would say earnings opportunities are down. You talk to some pros who are maybe 10 to 15 years older than me and retired now, and they talk about the 2000s being like a golden era of the sport. So on paper, there might be more prize money than ever, but it's spread among a deeper, more fleshed out field than ever before. And so I think it's very challenging these days. And you don't see many pros coming up on hard mode. I don't think anyone is self-made. I've definitely benefited from a lot of privilege and support in my career, but increasingly I think we see a lot of professionals who are experiencing success who are leaning on a partner or a family member or generational wealth or something. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's great for them, but it's very, very tough to just, be sleeping in the back of a pickup truck like the Sam Long story getting into the sport.
Yeah, totally. It's cool to see some of the like new kind of pro projects that are coming out through like Waterfall Bank. And I just saw that Triathlon Life has one coming out. Do you think some of those might help kind of push some people who maybe are having a tougher time to come up? What's kind of your take on some of those new kind of younger pro projects coming up?
Oh, I think they're fantastic. I would love to be in a position to fund one myself. It's one of my goals over the next 5 years. But those are a drop in the bucket relative to the broader industry dynamics. So they're going to help out a few athletes, and that's wonderful. I think those are really worthy projects. But by and large, it's never been harder to crack into pro triathlon, both due to the earnings opportunities and also the caliber of the field.
Yeah, talking about that caliber. So have you really noticed a change in the dynamic of racing? So a lot of your focus is like 70.3 Ironman stuff, and you have, like we saw in Kona last year, you got the Norwegians and stuff coming up from ITU stuff and crushing it at 70.3 and Ironman. Have you felt that kind of within the dynamic of the racing? Like what's been your biggest like shock in this?
I'm painfully aware of like the breakneck pace of improvement in the sport. It has never been deeper. And one of the biggest changes is that you can't have a weak discipline anymore. Like it used to be, athletes could win races with really a pretty lousy performance, relatively speaking, in one of the disciplines. Now, if you're even like a mid-rate cyclist or swimmer, you better be one of the top 10 in the world in the other disciplines to make up for that, you know? So that's really shifted a lot. Also, the way the dynamics of the races, how they play out, that's changed. Like it used to be, Ironman was maybe outside of a few select, very prestigious races like Kona, it was raced mostly like an individual time trial. That's my impression, even my early exposure to it. Now, 70.3 is almost like a short course race, and Ironman is almost like a 70.3 or shorter. There's major pack dynamics. There's athletes queuing off each other. Whereas I think before, at least at the lower levels, it used to be more like athletes sticking to their own individual race plan, kind of like an individual time trial. Now it's extremely dynamic.
So what are you changing within your like tactics and training to kind of adapt for that to continue to stay competitive?
Well, one, it's not enough to just tread water. Like you have to be constantly progressing, otherwise you're falling behind. So that's been really noticeable. Like I've leveled up my swimming and my running significantly over the last 5 years, and really pretty much only broken even relative to, I'd say, the global strength of field. So one of the things I've been investing in lately specifically is a big swim focus block. So at the end of last season, the last race I did was mid-September last year, Ironman Wisconsin. I had a long fall, winter off racing, but I haven't been wasting that time. I've been putting in like long hours in the pool because I know to be competitive at that next level, my swimming was a liability. And I wasn't a bad swimmer. Like I'd routinely be, you know, chase pack or back a front pack out of the water. But it just gives you so many more tactical options if you're like consistently in the front pack without really trying super hard, you know?
Yep, totally. You mentioned that you've improved a bunch on the kind of swim and run side in the last while. I've noticed you've kind of added Zwift to your repertoire this year. What was kind of the reason you added that in? Was that for bike improvements or just to change things up a bit? What was the reasoning behind that?
Definitely both. Yeah, I've admittedly been screwing around on the bike the last few years. I've put in a few great training blocks, but largely been really unmotivated. It's definitely the discipline I enjoy the least. So I had to change something. And, you know, I've always been like really methodical on my training. I could reason through like what was theoretically the optimal bike training approach to use. But at the end of the day, I think the best bike training I could do is the stuff I'm actually doing consistently. So I've been hopping in with a local group, mostly lowering personal coaching athletes, including my good friend Jackson Laundry, and a few other like younger athletes. It's been great. Like I don't even look up the workout details until we are doing the warm up a lot of the time, and just absolutely get destroyed twice a week on Zwift. And it's been my most consistent bike training block so far, and the numbers are starting to speak for themselves. So I think that's been a valid approach, but that's why we race, to figure that out.
Yeah. Have you been doing some Zwift racing on there as well?
You know, a little bit. I'm not a big fan of constantly testing and training. Like I'm very judicious about maximal efforts in training. Like really most of the training sessions are never, I kind of cap them at like a 9 out of 10 suffer score, I guess. So hard answer, I guess not really, but occasionally I'll hop in a Zwift race and just treat it like a workout.
Was there a time in your training where you used to do a bunch of that max training and that you kind of learned from that and kind of modified that over time?
Yeah, absolutely. I worked with a great coach who I respect in a ton of ways. I learned a lot from him, but part of the approach was like regular fitness tests. And I really struggled with that. And we talked a lot about the psychology behind it, because to me, like an effort to failure, that was like a emotionally devastating thing that I could only do a handful of times each year. And I kind of wanted to save that for the race course. So we eventually settled on like, no, what that really means for a fitness test is like best effort, whatever you feel like putting in on the day. Because truly going to failure in training, I think is stupid. That's something I only save for like 6 or even less races a year.
Mhm.
Yep. I think that's something we learned a lot in our
Oh
many
yeah.
years of triathlon here for sure. Yeah. I used to always be like, if you're not getting better unless you're like going to max in training or something like that. It's like you can have that extra, you can learn so much from your training without going right to that max level. And like, man, you're so much more consistent and
Yeah.
absorb the training way better at sub max.
It's kind of shocking. Yeah. Like don't get me wrong. It's really hard to train 20 to 30 hours a week as a pro, but a lot of it is not hard at all. You know, like a lot of it is shockingly easy. It's just about accumulating consistent volume.
It's the consistency.
So how you said you've been doing some self-coaching for a little while here. How do you kind of structure your training, and like, are you building out like a full year in small little blocks? Like, and where did you learn a bunch of this stuff? Is it just from your years of experience? What does that look like being self-coached?
Yeah, I've worked with some really fantastic coaches over, I mean, going all the way back to my days running cross country in high school. That was one of the most formative coaching relationships I had with my high school cross country coach. So I've learned from some great people. I would have been woefully unprepared to self-coach earlier in my career. I was making all kinds of mistakes. So hiring a professional triathlon coach early in my pro days, best decision I've ever made in the sport. Finally, though, I felt like I was at a point where I had like the maturity, the self-awareness, a degree of objectivity to be able to step back and self-coach. But it is really the objectivity that's the hardest part. Like when you're so immersed in your process every day, it's really hard to step back and put on your coaching hat and objectively look at what you're doing. Am I accomplishing what I'm intending to be doing? Is there a mismatch between what I think I'm doing and what I'm actually doing? So basically the year starts with laying out my race schedule, and that's a whole process unto itself. But once I have that figured out, then I kind of start to structure like the training blocks, what I want to be focusing on. First with very broad brush strokes, like I knew last fall and early into the winter would be a swim focus block, and then filling in the finer details, like what, intensity regime will I focus on the bike in this block, for example. And then the day-to-day stuff, that writes itself. That's that easy. That's not the hard part of self-coaching, I think.
I want to talk about fueling as well. Because
Yeah.
I mean, I know that you say it's a lot of it is maybe not at max effort as a triathlete, but you're training 25 to 30 hours a week. You're very outspoken about, the care and the consistency you bring to that area as well. But you've also shared that it hasn't always been that way. You mentioned that maybe earlier in your career, there was underfueling. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Sort of what were the signs for you? How did you catch it? And what have been the steps that you've taken to make sure that your fueling is matching your performance?
I love this question. I love to soapbox about this topic. So
So do I.
yeah, my history was straight up eating disorder. I would have probably downplayed it at the time, but in retrospect, all the signs were there. It was, undiagnosed, as most of them are, but there were so many problematic behaviors and just thinking around food. And I won't get too much into the details, but there were some screaming red flags at the time. Like I basically underfueled to the point where I was way, way leaner than I am now, like even as a cross country runner, inappropriately lean. And I really messed up my endocrine system. My testosterone levels were horrendous. I had low iron. There were other things going on. And so finally getting a blood test and seeing all that, I kind of could delude myself that things were okay, or I could rationalize it in all these perverse ways. But when I finally saw those numbers as a guy who likes data, it was like, damn, this is really screwed up. I need to start making changes. And it didn't happen overnight. It was a really gradual shift in, my thinking around food, and also very closely related compulsive exercise. They kind of were intertwined in a complex way. But, getting some expert help, like a sports doctor, a dietitian, the coach, those were all really, really instrumental. And yeah, it's something that I feel like now, more than 10 years later, I'm finally in the clear from, which I'm really grateful for, because disordered eating is horrendous. It's one of the most debilitating mental health problems. I've seen it prematurely destroy tons of really promising athletes' careers. And I can see the signs like a smoking gun sometimes in other athletes, and it's really, really hard to watch. So like I said, I like to be open about this because maybe it'll help people avoid some of the screw ups I made too. I guess my biggest realization is I'm still appreciating how much food it takes to fuel training at this level. It's obscene. Like if you're training 30 hours a week, the amount of food you have to eat is comical. And most of the rules that apply to eating for general population, mostly sedentary, even lightly active, you can literally take the exact opposite, and that's what applies for me. Like I need to be eating a lot of highly processed foods. I need to be eating a lot of sugar because my digestive capacity is a finite resource. Like banging out 5,000-6,000 calories day after day after day, that's actually really, really hard to do. Of course, it's a real first world problem, but like my partner just picked up a whole pile of baked goods and desserts, and I need to keep stuff like that around and eat dessert like 6 times a day because I can't subsist off like what most people would consider, wholesome, natural, clean food to hit those kinds of calorie numbers. So it's been a long, long journey to kind of arrive at where I am now, and this high performance relationship with food versus a very emotional, problematic, disordered relationship with food in the past.
Thank you so much for sharing all those details, because I think triathlon is an interesting sport because the caloric needs are so high for athletes that you can almost hide eating problems where it's, oh, I'm eating enough. But it's like you said, it's comical the amount that we have to eat. So even just like throwing out those rules of, you probably should have juice at every meal just to add in that those carbs. And one thing that is quite remarkable in what you said is, it's wonderful that you're a data guy, that you can see that and make a decision. But that moment where there's probably that intersection of like that emotional and unrational with the rational, and that takes a lot of grit and strength and mindset to overcome. So I love how you sought out support that was just outside of yourself. Sometimes muscling through that alone isn't the best approach. So thanks for laying all of that out. And just showing how you sort of overcame that mindset, and also sharing that it took, almost a decade to do. This isn't a quick fix, especially when we're surrounded by a culture where it's repeated day after day after day.
And we're of course we're eating all the time, and so it wears very deep grooves in terms of your your neural circuitry, I guess, and in terms of your behaviors and practices around food. So it takes a long time to undo that.
And our bodies are always changing too, right? So what works for you today might not work in 5 years. And it's just, I think that's part of the fun of it all, is you're this puzzle piece that you're always figuring out.
I love that aspect of the sport. And in my case, it's been really validating because I came from this place of like that crappy testosterone levels, really low bone density, osteopenia as a early 20 something. And now in my 30s, I've got like higher testosterone, better bone density than I did 10 years ago, which is not the direction things are supposed to go. So it's pretty clear, like if you treat your body well and respectfully in terms of what you're eating, like good things will flow from that.
Absolutely. So it sounds like a blood test was really one of the key things that actually really helped set you on the right path. And I know Inside Tracker is a big part of what you do and use day to day. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you leverage that now to support all of that intel so that you can, keep fueling your body in the right way.
Yeah, that's been one of my favorite new sponsorships over the last little while. So I've been blood testing my whole career, but even in Canada with public medicine, it can be a bit of a tough sell to get a doctor to, prescribe a comprehensive blood test. Yeah. So Inside Tracker looks at all these different biomarkers, and some of them are really interesting to me. Like it's basically a pretty extensive endocrine panel, everything else you'd look for in an athlete, like B12, iron, vitamin D. Those are all things I monitor pretty closely. Especially my diet's mostly plant-based, not strictly by any stretch. So that's something to be a little bit more aware of. It can take a little bit more work to make sure you're not, hitting any deficiencies. So I think it's been fascinating to monitor that multiple times a year now.
What's been one of the biggest changes that you've made recently as a result of the intel that you got from Inside Tracker?
So I've been always really minimal with supplements. I just prefer to rely on my diet, and any new supplement you're introducing introduces risks. For a professional athlete who's tested, you hear about tainted supplements all the time. So I'm really careful about anything like that. I look for a proven evidence basis before I supplement anything. So Inside Tracker showed I was outside of my optimal ranges for magnesium. So I started supplementing that, as well as recently B12. And even vitamin D was trending a little bit lower over the winter. So I topped that up a little bit as well. And that's basically the list of my supplements right there.
Nice. Some of those other things around training. So there's obviously more to the puzzle than just training. We talked about nutrition here, but what about some of those other like non-negotiables for you around, maybe it's recovery, strength training? What are some of those other things that you do around training that help you continue to perform at a high level?
Oh, recovery. There's another one I like to soapbox about. So
yes.
Yeah, triathletes understandably obsessed with recovery. We're tired all the time. There's a whole industry that preys on triathletes need to recover and will want to sell you all kinds of gimmicky stuff. The deeper I've gotten to this career, the more I appreciate that it really is like 99% about sleep and nutrition and appropriate training load and stress management. And the rest is like the most marginal of gains, like you name it, I've tried it within the rules, obviously. And I just focus on the big picture stuff. Like sleep has been one of my biggest limiters over my career. I've made an absolute art/science of dialing in my sleep. I think that's the most impactful thing most athletes can be doing. Like if you're not optimizing your sleep and your diet and your training plan, and you're focusing on little rinky-dink recovery interventions, you're missing the forest for the trees.
Yep. What are Cody Beals' top sleep tips to optimize?
I have a draft TikTok about this. I think I want to do it. Man. Oh, blackout curtains, white noise machine, dimmable lighting throughout the house so I can, set the tone after the work day, because I work at home, obviously, so does my partner. So that really helps delineate like work, sleepy time from sleepy time, personal time, whatever. I've tried melatonin with mixed results, same with magnesium, tried a weighted blanket. That was a big no for me. Mindfulness and meditation in the evening, that's definitely good. Temperature regulation, like keeping the house really cool, good ventilation, good mattress. I'm probably missing things. The white noise machine is one that I recommend to a lot of people. That was a game changer.
Nice. Yeah, we got the like cooling mattress pad. That one's been glorious too. Yeah, definitely recommend that. Keeps it cool. Although Jess, if she had it her way, it would be like 30 degrees in the room with a weighted blanket every night. So
Oh yeah. The
But
other
with
the
a
other
cooling
thing
blanket.
the other thing I'll confess I do with sleep is that this is definitely a luxury of my career and self-coaching, but I basically don't set alarms for workouts and don't schedule commitments in the morning, which is like a little bit mortifying to admit. I know that's like a lot of people with 9 to 5 jobs are going to hate me for that,
No,
but
you deserve it.
my wake up time ranges between like 5 a.m. and 11 a.m. And I just roll. Like if my body needs 10 plus hours of sleep that day, I do it. If I'm up after 6, then I'll go hit the morning swim early. So that's obviously a luxury of my career, but I do consider sleep like the absolute best use of my time, not only as a pro triathlete, but as a human being. Like I'm just my best self when my sleep is dialed in. Everything else will flow from that.
I just read Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep.
Uh-huh.
And there's very few books I find that like legitimately change your life. That one is exactly that. Like it lays out an irrefutable case of why we need sleep for every person. There's people who claim, oh, I need like 3 to 4 hours. I don't need as much
Yes.
sleep as the average person. He's like,
Yeah.
there's 0% of the population that need to do that. Everyone needs sleep and at least 7 to 8 hours. So I'm completely with you, Cody.
You're the third person to recommend that book to me. So
It's a 10 out of 10.
it really is so good.
And if you're a data guy, you'll love it.
okay.
It's like science with storytelling, but it hits a great balance.
Can I also admit I have a lot of trouble reading nonfiction? Like I read a ton, and it's part of my bedtime routine actually. But one thing I'd add to that list of sleep things is like a good escapist book, like some fiction that just takes you off into another world so far outside your career. I don't know if I could read a book about sleep right before bed because it feels too career centric. But maybe
Yeah,
I'll have to
don't read
carve
it.
out some time in the morning for that.
Or like listen to it while you're training.
Yeah. Okay.
What kind of books, what books have you read lately?
Oh man, I've been on a real tear of like dystopic post-apocalyptic books. I don't know, kind of a downer, I guess, but it's a genre I really like. And yeah, I'm also a sucker for a good romance sometimes too, honestly.
Yeah, I think that escape is so important. Like I find same thing if I'm like reading a book and learning or something like that, it needs to be like fresh in the morning. But I think there's something so good to unwind. I remember I would try and read these like like educational books before bed and I would absorb none of it. And I'm like, well, now I just wasted all this time reading and
Yeah.
absorbed nothing of it. Too good. We were just on the topic of being tired there, and I wanted to jump a little bit back to a little bit of the racing you did last year. So I know you had a bunch of Ironmans in a row last year. Got a Lake Placid win in there, but a bunch of Ironmans. I think you did like 3 in 10 weeks at some point last year.
7 weeks actually.
7 weeks. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I did not give that the justice it deserved. What did you, first of all, why did you do that? And second of all, what were kind of some learnings you you pulled away from that?
Yeah, so I mean, last year was my 9th pro season, and I was looking for a new challenge. Like I tried to hit the ball out of the park at one race before after a long training block. So the question was, could I string together 3 good enough performances in 7 weeks like that? And yeah, I think it was. I came away with 3 podiums and 1 win. So a first, a second, a third at 3 Ironmans. I was pretty happy with that. And I'd say I learned more about the sport and myself in those 7 weeks than entire previous seasons. It was really, really humbling. Like one thing I came to appreciate was that there's a distinction between the physical recovery and readiness from an Ironman with respect to the psychological as well. So like Lake Placid, I felt like I brought my B form, but I was really, really hungry and ready to smash and had a pretty good execution. The next one in Mont Tremblant, I had good, even better form, I'd say, but just wasn't really ready to go to that dark place again so soon after. It was only a month after. And then the last one, I got my head in the right place. I was ready to hurt, but by that point, my fitness was kind of trending in the wrong direction and I was really tired. So it just taught me a lot about kind of my own limits and how I recover from these races. And I didn't learn my lesson because I'm thinking about doing it again this year.
Why not, right? Can improve on it from the last time. Yeah, we just had Justin Metzler on, and he was just talking about how, well, he talked about his Lake Placid story of like
Oh yeah,
leading for a long time that day, but like how just
crushing.
Ironman exposes like every single weakness you have. Have you kind of felt that, and what have been kind of your like biggest learnings to Ironman success that you've had?
Oh man, that's a very broad question.
Take it whatever direction you want.
I would agree with Justin's take. It does expose any weakness. And like, of course, there's going to be some extremely dark moments during an Ironman. Like I was in such a weird headspace during Wisconsin, the last of those three. It was like a dreadful day. It was raining. It was, like 10 degrees or something like that. So everyone got hypothermic, including the podium. And yeah, it's like you have to rely on all these mental skills and this toolkit you put together to get through hours in this very, very dark place in your head. So I do a lot of work and training around building up a mental library of things I can focus on, things I can draw positive energy from when I'm racing, because inevitably I've always had to rely on that. Like, I think it's always better to be very present and engaged with whatever you're doing. But I've also needed to kind of think about other positive memories and power phrases and music and people and moments to get me through those really long, grueling days.
What are some of those?
Oh man, that's very personal.
Maybe
One
like
thing I
some of
like,
your favorite phrases.
phrases I don't rely as much on. One thing I actually really like is imagining sending myself to a different location entirely. Like when the misery of the race course is just too abject, too brutal. I'll imagine, this is getting a little metaphysical, but I'll imagine like just projecting my consciousness elsewhere, if you can understand that. And one place I visited, I toured a really cool ice cave in Austria that was just like so sleepy and relaxing and peaceful and cool, and like the opposite of a hot, loud, unpleasant Ironman race course. So that's a place I'll revisit in my delirium of late Ironman marathons sometimes.
That's a good tip for anyone listening, because especially those like new in triathlon or doing, I know, their first marathon, and you just wrapping your head around what happens to you physically and where you need to go mentally. If you don't have that toolbox, you're grossly unprepared for what's coming your way. So I love the idea of being able to, I mean, find your own space you're going to go to, but taking a tip from you in terms of what are some of those tricks. So thanks for sharing that.
Of course, but I would reiterate, like, you want to be spending most of the time present, engaged, dialoguing with that pain, because I think there's even research to back that's the highest performance outcome. But in my experience, I personally can't do that for 8 hours, let alone 17 on an Ironman race course. So you have to kind of break it up a little bit.
I think you're 100% right. And it's even on a great day, being fully present. It is exhausting to be fully present for something, especially when pain is involved. So
For sure.
yeah. Okay. We've talked a little bit about, all of the incredible things you've done. What are some of big goals that you have to knock off in your career? What's left for you?
When I got into the career, I kind of had like a list of boxes to tick. And I thought maybe I would be ready to retire after I won 10 races. And I think Lake Placid was number 11 for professional wins. And I kind of realized like it's not relevant anymore to have boxes to tick. I'm still very motivated to improve. I still have, specific goals, but if an injury ended my career abruptly tomorrow, it would be upsetting, but I think I would be able to make peace with that. So I've done what I want to do. If there is one thing though, it's that after I broke the Ironman Ultra Long Course record in 2019, beat Lionel, who's been one of my like fiercest rivals over the years and usually kicked my butt. It was a breakthrough day for me. And I remember just someone commenting like, he might not know it, but this is likely the peak of his career. And I scoffed at that at the time. I was like, dude, this is my third Ironman. Like, I'm just getting warmed up. And then I had 3 years of shit. Like the pandemic happened. I had injuries for the first time in my career. And if I'm honest, I still haven't hit that benchmark of performance quite on that level again. I've come close. So if there's one more thing I want to do, I want to prove that guy wrong. No, prove to myself that I still have better days ahead of me in Ironman racing. And I really believe that.
Absolutely. I feel like Ironman is one of those incredible sports where almost the longer you're in it, it's such a complex recipe of different things, and the endurance, I think it suits that the more seasoned athlete tends to do better. So I think your best days are ahead.
For sure,
But
though. There's also been like a bit of a paradigm shift. When I was getting into the sport in my 20s, the conventional wisdom was that men tend to peak, around their early to mid 30s, maybe even late 30s at Ironman. And so I felt like I had nothing but time. And I just turned 33 this month. And the dynamics are changing. Like,
happy
if we look at
birthday.
who was top 10 at Kona last year, or top 5, it was a young crop of athletes. And yeah, it takes a long time to reach physical aerobic maturity. It can take decades. There's definitely a later peak to master 3 sports compared to, a single sport, but it might not be as late as we realized. So I am very aware the clock is ticking down. Now, I could have many more years of good racing if I want that and I play my cards right, but I'm not squandering any more opportunities now.
Amazing. And looking beyond just goals, I'd like to talk about legacy. You talked a little bit about, maybe hinted at a pro triathlon project. When you look at sort of the legacy or the stamp you want to leave on the sport, what does that look like for you?
That's a great question. I've been asked that a number of times and I still really struggle with it because I'm like, I kind of scoff at the word legacy. It's like, I'm a pro athlete and I feel really privileged to do this, but it's like a silly made up sport. And am I really going to be leaving behind a legacy? It feels very self-important. So I don't have a great answer, but I would like to continue to support younger pros. I've just informally mentored a few, but I'd like to formalize that a bit more and have a scholarship one day. And I'd also like to help make triathlon a little bit more inclusive too. I think it's a really welcoming community, but it is still very homogeneous in terms of who does triathlon. It's a pretty affluent group of people. There's a perception you need a lot of money to get into the sport. I don't know. I don't have a plan for this yet, but I would like to help chip away at that and make inroads in terms of making triathlon more inclusive and welcoming to a lot of people. And maybe that means like outreach to local high schools or colleges or universities.
Something we're passionate about as well. And I think we were just chatting with Rach McBride and just talking about like the difficulty of being a professional triathlete and then also advocating for these things, because that's a full-time job as well. And it's not necessarily, I mean, you can be outspoken and use your power and your position to make that change, but there's so much work that everyone needs to band together to do. And I think when I look at all the sports, I think triathlon is one with like a bullseye that we have like a mountain to climb when it comes to just inclusion, diversity, and in a positive spin, just like you did at the very beginning, we have nothing but opportunity. So I'm actually really excited to see what's going to happen in the next like 10 to 20 years in the sport. I think it's going to look completely different. And it's neat. I know you scoff at the word legacy, but you really have been one of the change makers to at least start the conversations and start moving it in the right direction. And so thank you for that, because these are conversations that need to be had.
That's very generous. I would say too generous, but thanks.
Okay, let's stop looking so far in the horizon. What are some things or races that you are looking to do in 2023?
So calf injury permitting, which I'm cautiously optimistic about, my next plan is Ironman Texas, and then follow it up 2 weeks later with the ITU World Triathlon Long Distance World Championships in Ibiza, Spain. And then after that, there's a plan, or option A, option B. So if I'm doing well with PTO points and I'm in the hunt for a spot for the Collins Cup and a high ranking inside the top 20, then I will chase those opportunities at the PTO US Open and maybe the PTO Asian Open. If I'm not caring as much about that, then something I'm equally happy about, a win-win, would be to maybe bang out 3 Ironmans in, I think, 8 weeks again, which would be Placid, defend my title there, Ironman Canada, and then Ironman Maryland, which is a course that I've won on 4 times at Eagleman, and the Eagleman doesn't exist this year. So going back there for the Ironman for the first time would be pretty cool.
Nice. And the one you obviously didn't mention in there at all was Ironman World Championship. Does Nice not excite you? And what are you thinking of this Nice-Kona split?
Oh man, do you want to have me back for a whole other conversation about that? I feel like I could
extend this an hour. Here we go.
I'll try and keep it brief. So I think Nice illustrates the decisions around that by Ironman, illustrates some of the problems with having, I'll choose my words carefully, having the de facto international governing body of the sport as a for-profit corporation. And Ironman has been very consistent in how they've made decisions, and it's been to, optimize the profits of the company. And we probably shouldn't expect more from them, from their board, from their leadership, because that's what corporations are going to do. They're going to be corporations. So if you accept that, you'll stop being disappointed by the decisions they make. Okay, so that big picture stuff aside, I have no issue with the rotating world championships. I think it would be super cool if it went to different locations. I don't see anything special about Kona. I would definitely not prefer to see the split in the men's and women's field. I think that's detrimental for a lot of reasons. If there's a silver lining, it's that it might help showcase some of the amazing women's talent in our sport. But apart from that, I think there's a lot of problems with it. And I just prefer to see a smaller, more exclusive world championship field. In terms of Nice specifically, I have issues with that. We're waiting to see what the course is going to look like. But if it's indeed the same course as the 70.3 world champs in 2019, I do not believe it's a safe course, period. I won't mince words about that. The last time there was a world championships there in 2019 for 70.3, 3 pro men, 3 friends of mine, including, my best friend Jackson, all had like catastrophic crashes. Jackson still has like a 20-inch scar all over his shoulder. So I feel like I have secondhand PTSD from him. And seeing the way that male pros race, yeah, I'm not the best bike handler in the world. I grew up in the flatlands, not the mountains, but I'm not bad either. It's just people take outrageous risks. And I feel like on a descent like that, there's a trade-off between what do you have to do to be competitive and what is reasonable in terms of my personal risk tolerance. So maybe that's a lame answer and not what fans want to hear and stuff, but no one race is worth, changing my life with a career-ending or life-changing accident.
Yeah, hey, we appreciate your transparency. Yeah, that Nice course is crazy. Like we were both there in 2019 and Jess was like, oh yeah, pretty like tame on the female day. And then I was like, yeah, there was like 40 ambulances on the descent. I ran through a whole like set of brake pads that day. I'm like, this is not worth it for
so you
100th in my age group.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
you
if
aren't
you're racing
alone.
for a paycheck, it's people are willing to take even more outrageous risks, I adventure.
Wild.
Yeah, you're not alone in that stance, Cody. I think that there's quite a few who share your perspective in the safety element. And that's the other thing is if your ability to physically move your body is your profession, these are things that you need to think about. And so this is something that I'm curious about because you are such a great professional triathlete. What would you do as a career if you wouldn't have chosen triathlon?
Oh, that's a good one. So I did my degree in physics and I got into environmental science consulting for a few years before I picked up triathlon. Really, that kind of tapered off as triathlon ramped up. So I was doing that from home. It was really cool work and it felt very meaningful in a way that sometimes pro triathlon doesn't, like I felt like I was a small part of actually making a difference and, remediating these environmental disasters and stuff. So that was cool work, but I didn't feel called to it in the same way as pro triathlon. I have been thinking about what the next phase of my career will be. Hopefully it's at least 3 years away, if not longer. But the short answer, I don't have a definite plan yet. I'm really respectful of what it takes to taper off such a profound physiological addiction to training like this. And I've seen some pro athletes really struggle with loss of identity and mental health in their retirement. And I've had some great conversations around that. So I do want to have a plan. And I think a cool part of that plan would be maybe renovating an old house or something like that for a year. I'd love to be in a position to just take a year off immediately having to earn money and pour myself into something else with a similar daily physicality to training. So I've done one reno on this little old, century home here, and I think I've got one more in me in my life. So I'd love to do that for a little while. Then plot out the next step.
Seeing how resourceful you are, I feel like you would crush at like house flipping. I feel like that's a good like niche for you to go after.
Oh man, mixed feelings on that in the midst of a housing crisis, but renos are really enjoyable. Yeah, sometimes on a good day.
Well, if you pick up renos in your next career, we'll bring you on as a home hardware ambassador. That'll be the next podcast.
Right on.
So we brought you on because you're our endurance icon, but we'd love to hear who's one of yours.
That's a good question. It's really hard to narrow it down to one. One person that came to mind is Leanne DeCave. She's won pretty much everything there is to win. And I got to spend some really cool time with her traveling to a few races, sort of at the end of her professional career, at least over Ironman, and near the start of my career. We road tripped down the coast of Mexico to a race there, and we traveled for a couple other races together. And she just had so much wisdom to impart. And I said earlier, I don't think there are really any self-made athletes in the sport. I mean, everyone benefits from, the flow of privilege and support and stuff, but Leanne is the closest thing you'll find. It's a real rags to riches story. And I have a ton of respect for her. And she just carries herself with like such dignity and grace. And yeah, she's a queen. Simon Whitfield's also been really generous with his time too. And he's another athlete who has made an interesting transition to post-racing life. And he's kind of like a athlete, poet, philosopher now. So he's a pretty cool guy to talk to.
Oh, I love both of those. Well, Cody, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This was such a pleasure to be able to talk to you. For those who want to follow you, where's the best way to get all of your fun videos and content and follow your races in 2023?
Folks can find me on Instagram and TikTok at cody.beals.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. This was so much fun to be able to talk to you.
Thank you both. Really enjoyed it.
Wow. How great was that? I always learn so much from these endurance icons. If you enjoyed the podcast as well, please consider liking us across social media, subscribing to us on YouTube, or giving us a 5-star rating on wherever you listen to your podcasts. We appreciate you and your support so much. We wish you happy training, and we'll see you back next week.